With fears of the coronavirus spreading around the country, many schools are faced with the dreaded thought of whether they should shut down. We talk now to Riaan Van Berg from Fedsas. Riaan, tell us about Fedsas.
Fedsas is a school governing body association, the Federation of School Governing Bodies of South African Schools, and we advise our member schools on all matters related to school governance, of which one would be the safety of learners. My particular niche is that of technology in education and how we advance schools using technology in this day and age. And it's suddenly very relevant with the coronavirus scare.
No, absolutely. There's a need for many conversations, but one of the big conversations, and may I just apologize how uncourteous of me not to welcome you first.
Thank you. Thank you.
The prospect or the growth of e-learning now is a real prospect.
Yeah, I think the discussion is probably triggered by Corona in a sense of what do we do in a potential and hopefully very unlikely event of school closures, although two private schools, independent schools closed, one in the Midlands last week and one in Grayston this week. So we're hoping that school closures would not be necessary, but the discussion to be held is, I think, the important one to say, can schools prepare themselves should something catastrophic like that happen, and how does schooling, learning and teaching continue in that state? So we're thinking the discussion is a normal discussion. How do we use the tools of our time to duplicate teachers' time, to post lessons online and have a blended learning model, have parents that help their kids later on in the day access that lesson that was presented this morning, so that the parent is involved and has the understanding to advise and support the learner with preparation for homework or tests or assessment and that kind of thing. So I think there's a normalized state of technology in education, and then this current scare, should we have to go to the route of school closures, how can we use the tools of our time? There's a few companies now that have jumped into the space. We just recently had reports of a company like Microsoft saying a lot of their products are available for free to schools, and some some additional products are now available for 6 months, even in the commercial space, so that remote working becomes an option to talk about, so that we can prepare for it.
And also that announcement by Vodacom yesterday to say a percentage of their free data service will be given to educational and academic purposes. What percentage of South African schools is online ready?
I think access to online capabilities, a lot. I think it was Deloitte that presented a paper in 2017 to show the penetration of internet coverage in the country. So there's a lot of schools that have access. Whether they are ready and preparing themselves to be ready by using the tools, I think that's the difficulty. So I would say urbanized schools have great access to steady broadband, high-speed internet. Rural areas struggle because the service providers don't.
What do you mean by overnight schools?
Urbanized.
Urbanized.
High density. So I think Gauteng, Western Cape, the Eastern Cape high density centres, those centres, metropolitan areas have already been serviced by high speed internet service providers. And if a school is using those services, they are very close to being ready. As long as they're connected, they're ready by just deploying some tools that are available.
Another conversation that comes into this is the need for new ways of learning, like project-based learning, but also perhaps a concern about the demise of teachers.
Yeah, we have a saying that teachers will never be replaced by technology, because that's like saying policemen will be replaced by guns. It's the tool that it's not the tool that just does the job, it's the person that does the job. What we're adding to that is teachers that don't use technology will be replaced by teachers that know how to use technology, because it's a tool that makes us more efficient.
A smaller number of teachers, though. Because one teacher from one base can get a bigger, has got scale.
Scale is possible, so you can get the best of breed teacher teaching to a lot of learners, but you need one-on-one contact. The Schools Act and the regulatory framework of schooling does not allow for a class more than 40 learners, and in some cases 35. So the facilitation of learning...
Well, that paper's thrown out the window when you talk about online.
But you still need facilitation, and the blended model,
Yeah.
I don't think kids will facilitate themselves to learn just by sitting in front of the TV or a computer screen. So there's still the social interaction, the schooling process, the question and answer, and the peer-based learning. So yes, you can send a lot of projects out, publish them and say, do a lot of stuff by yourself, but you still got to present them to a teacher and get feedback. So it's quick feedback, it's end of the term feedback.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing that school as a location will change, but definitely the use of the tools. Just by recording a lesson, you can have it reach 5 times more just to the same class, because every day in South Africa there are learners absent. Every day there are learners struggling with homework later that day. Every day, or at the end of term, there are learners that prepare for the exam or the test. End of the year, they do revision as well. So that one lesson has 5 times the mileage than just the one real-time live session.
A person watching our conversation might be tempted to think that the conversation is essentially about e-learning, but what we're talking about is responses to COVID-19.
Yeah.
How has this affected schooling?
I think the scare is definitely real. What we're saying to schools is prepare yourself for an event and think about what the options are. But let's not fuel the panic. Let's
Absolutely,
work with,
that's
let's
very
work
important.
with facts and not with fear.
Yeah.
I think good leadership is required now and not sensation, but it is a real concern, and the concern of our learners are obviously front of mind all the time. So we need to make calculated concerns or calculated decisions based on the concerns we have. So COVID-19 bubbles up the conversation about the use of technology, and in the short term it's very easy. Just record the lesson and deploy it on a platform like Microsoft Teams.
Yeah.
Send it to parents. Even WhatsApp is an option for just distributing information. Have kids do lessons or project-based learning at home. Give them some work, which we do every day in any case. We say, go do this homework and bring it back tomorrow.
Yeah.
We can give homework for 2-3 days if needed. So just the discussion of preparing yourself in the space so that if it's necessary, we go that route. But the longer term discussion is, how do we blend the learning with the tools so that whatever comes our way, even if it's not Corona, if it's another potential catastrophic event, how are we ready for that? But not to deploy to an e-learning base. We believe in the blended learning model, or more so in the classroom learning model, and just giving it more mileage and more efficiency.
As you're saying, the usage of technology and its tools is a long-term view. As we speak, pupils are still presenting in person in classes, and there has been a lot of talk, especially from the Department of Health, about safety, health and hygiene protocols that can be followed. What are you doing in this regard?
What we're telling our schools is, don't panic. Contact the Department of Education if there's a scare. Contact the Department of Health. And in the normal day-to-day education, let's educate ourselves out of the problem and do a lot of talking around personal hygiene, personal health. Instill, the bell rings every now and then at a school, I think very regularly. Have the kids then focus on washing their hands regularly. So in general, without creating a scare, let's uplift the education base for personal hygiene and personal health.
The biggest joke that goes around in broadcasting is that we're supposed to be communicators, but sometimes we're not up to standard. And education, and you're talking about people educating themselves. Education is the one place, the coalface of where this should be happening, but is it?
I think we will always struggle with the balance. Educators have so much to do that they have little time
besides teaching.
So we use the term that we've got to be lifelong learners, and educators have to be learners themselves. So I think in this time, educators, school management, school governing bodies need to also go and read up and get the facts, get the understanding so that we can disseminate that information. And then, teach ourselves out of trouble.
Riaan, you come from an organization that coordinates parents in terms of their involvement in schools. And today we're just talking about your online responses. What other responses are governing bodies taking in relation to COVID?
Yeah, I think it forms part of the bigger picture of good governance, and we say we need to be aware of what's going on. A school is not a separate entity or an isolated community from the rest of society. So COVID-19 is in the news. It's a societal issue and a societal matter. So we don't need to take away all the problems or isolate the problems of society and just put it on the school's table and say. So I think good understanding, good communication, tell people to be reasonable and understand it. So go search for tips on how to manage personal hygiene at home. Don't just ignore what's happening at home. Yeah. So what we're telling schools is to take reasonable measures and communicate, but also to understand that the school can't fix the whole society and the whole community. It's a government problem, it's a societal problem, it's a business problem. Some businesses have asked their employees to work remotely if it is at all possible and their jobs allow that. So it's part of the bigger picture in society. So yes, focus on the school, but draw the bridge to the rest of society as well.
Yeah. It's a problem of our times, isn't it? And all sorts of interventions are required. The minister was saying earlier, yesterday actually, at the OR Tambo airport, that there is no cure for the virus itself specifically, but that people need to improve on their health and improve on these hygiene protocols to keep themselves safe. And it's an important message that we should be sending out, especially to environments like schools where there are bigger groups of people in one place at the same time.
100%. So yeah, I think we need to be sensible about this, read about all the tips, listen to the Department of Health's news broadcasts, media releases, see what you can do yourself, and then prepare yourself for whatever could happen. If there is a suspected case, act immediately. Contact school management, contact the parents, contact the Department of Education, contact the Department of Health, and let's manage and contain it as much as possible. And then do the tips. Don't just read about the tips we need to do, but do it at school, do it at home.
So the conversation we were talking about earlier in relation to e-learning, in other societies, in other communities, there's concerns of access. How are you going to circumvent this?
Yes, access is a function of infrastructure, and it's not necessarily just an education problem. So what we're hoping is that local schools, which are governed by a local governing body, this is the public school model in the country, stand up and take responsibility and also voice their needs. We need to get internet access to all the schools in the country. Yeah. Not just baseline access, but proper, steady, speedy access to schools. How can you do education without the internet when everyone walks around with a cell phone and Googles every question they have? Yeah. So I think access to, and good news from Vodacom yesterday, and hoping to have some other networks follow soon, that data costs are coming down. But I believe at least half the schools in the country need to be connected for free by the networks, if I read the CASA Act, Electronic Communications and Transactions Act correctly. Service providers need to connect schools. So if we've got access at school, then the school becomes the hub of the society where access to all the information, all the good on the internet is. And then we've got to manage the risks on the internet as well, all the bad stuff.
Riaan, I'm just going to take advantage of having you here and just move on to other societal issues that affect governing bodies, specifically in Gauteng this year alone. Massive numbers of deaths at schools and responsibility sometimes being put at the door of governing bodies. How are governing bodies interacting with the issue of safety at schools?
Yeah, I think it's critical, and it's tragic that the year started with so many incidents. I think it's up to 13 learners in Gauteng that's been reported on. And yes, we need to take care. Parents need to be more involved, and I think that's one of the big issues. A good school functions with good home and parental involvement. But when a learner is delivered to school, transported to school, and in care of the school, then the school is responsible with, the Latin term is in loco parentis. That's the temporary parent of the learner. So physical safety, virtual, internet safety of learners, we think is very important, and schools need to maybe relook their policies and relook how they address the issues of safety. We believe strongly that the regulatory framework is good in Gauteng, and people need to follow the steps. But then the Department of Education, like in the Parktown Boys scenario, need to respond quickly with the requests for a field trip. We don't want to take field trips out of schooling, but we want to make sure that it's safe. Another thing is we just need to be caring. I'm concerned that moving around a lot of paper for applying for approval and the department sending approval back, moving around a lot of paper is not going to make learners safe. It's going to ensure that there's a safer environment. But we've got to take care. We've got to be vigilant. We've got to understand the risks and not just, be blind to the potential risks. One of the big issues with us that we're not managing is that of virtual safety. Internet-based safety, data being hacked, bank accounts being hacked, identity theft and identity fraud. So there's a lot of issues in that space as well that schools need to take care of.
Riaan Van Berg, would like to have you back someday to speak, just to unpack the situation within school governing bodies. But today, Riaan Van Berg, how do I say?
Van der Berg.
Riaan Van Berg talking to us from Fedsas, talking about how the coronavirus outbreak is calling for changes in teaching and learning, especially highlighting the e-learning space.